In 1999 in New Mexico, the police receive a strange testimony from a woman who claims to have just escaped her kidnapper. But what first appears to be another grim case of abduction soon unveils a far darker, more disturbing, nightmarish truth. Can the police even carry out a full investigation when the victims themselves can't remember what happened? To find out, I invite you to follow me into the chilling and terrifying case of the Toy Box Killer, considered one of the most horrific sex crime cases in American history. Warning, some parts of this story may be disturbing to sensitive listeners. New Mexico, vast canyons, endless highways, solitary cowboys. Tucked away in the far south of the United States, it offers an iconic landscape we've all seen at least once in Western films. A world of its own, somewhere between desert fantasy and geographical isolation, with over 40,000 miles of arid plains. In Sierra County, a small community of just over 6,000 residents lives amidst a mix of ethnic backgrounds: Anglo-Americans, Mexicans, African-Americans, Native Americans, and Asians. But there's little unity, marked by casual racism on all sides, plagued by unemployment, violence, and a deep lack of structure. You get the picture. Sierra is no stranger to weird or depraved events, rape cases, kidnappings, organized crime, biker gangs hooked on meth, a filthy cocktail of chaos and despair. Local police are used to daily incidents, dispatched all over the region. Fights and assaults are routine, but nothing could have prepared them for the chilling 911 call relayed by a dispatcher on March 22, 1999. "I'm calling about a young woman who just escaped from a house where she says she was being held and raped. She's completely naked, wearing only a dog collar around her neck, chained and locked. Apparently, she managed to escape after 3 days of captivity." That woman was Cynthia Vigil. She was 21 years old and worked as a prostitute. Mixed race, brunette, slim and attractive, she eventually fell into the vicious cycle of heroin addiction. Night after night, between clients, to keep her spirits up, to endure the job, to give herself courage and stamina, Cynthia tried everything, encouraged by Johns, fellow sex workers, and flings. Dealers all knew her. Some would wait outside the women's restrooms of her usual bars. Others would deliver directly to her, even at home. Despite 2 overdoses that nearly killed her, she never managed to quit. Heroin became her reason to live, the reason she put on her heels and fishnets every night to work the streets. How did she end up in that dark, locked room, tied to a filthy cot, raped repeatedly, beaten, and threatened? She remembers none of it. And later, how did she find herself running, completely naked, down a deserted road in broad daylight, with a dog collar around her neck, her ankles bloodied and chained? She can't recall that either, not clearly, as if during her escape, she was outside of her body, like in an out-of-body experience. But who's going to believe her? A drug-addicted prostitute with memory lapses, almost never sober? But before I tell you what happened to Cynthia, we need to go back 2 years earlier, to where it all began. July 1996. The bar is already packed, and it's not even 6 p.m. yet. A dusty, kitschy Mexican-style dive lost in Sierra County, where all the local punks hang out to drink and flirt. Kelly Van Cleve arrives first. Around 9 p.m., Kelly decides to walk one of her drunk friends home. The girl doesn't live far, and Kelly doesn't have a car. Since the other can still walk, they make the trip on foot, stopping along the way for her to vomit and pee. Half an hour later, Kelly returns to the bar, alone. She's a bit disappointed to see the others have already left. Only Jesse Parker Ray remains, sitting on the lap of a tall, dark-haired guy. She waves Kelly over, but Kelly decides to let her flirt in peace and sits a little farther away. The night's vibe is already turning dull and depressing. Afraid of getting drunk and angering her mom, she orders a Coke and sips it absent-mindedly. Around 10 p.m., Jesse calls out, "Hey, hun, want me to drive you home?" Sure, why not? They get into Jesse's light blue pickup. It's already pitch dark, and the roads are empty. They drive in silence for a while. Then Kelly asks something, out of curiosity. But instead of heading toward Kelly's place, Jesse suddenly changes direction and heads toward her father's property at Elephant Lake, on the other side of the county. "I just need to grab something at home first, then I'll drop you off," she says. The truck pulls into a rundown, creepy-looking compound. Calling it a property is generous. It's a mix of trailers and old trucks connected together on a dusty patch of land. 2 Dobermans start barking as the truck stops at the gate. You coming in? Not really in the mood. Come on, let's grab a quick coffee and I'll take you home right after. Fine, okay. Inside, the contrast is jarring. The house seems big, clean, well lit. The furniture is simple, rustic, and there's an open kitchen facing a cozy-looking living room with a fireplace. Still, something feels off. No warmth, no signs of family life, no smell of a home. Jessie seats Kelly on the sofa, then disappears, saying she'll make some coffee. Kelly waits. She starts to feel impatient. She stands up, paces a bit, and calls out, "Jessie?" Twice, no answer. Then Jessie returns, with someone. An older man, still fit, blonde mustache, youthful haircut. Kelly doesn't know what to say. Father and daughter both stare at her, their looks unsettling, disturbing. Panic takes over, especially when the man pulls out a knife and threatens to slit her throat. Everything happens fast. The two overpower the slender young woman, handcuff her wrists, and drag her out of the house, toward a trailer in the backyard. She struggles, but it's no use. Dogs bark furiously. The mustached man shoves her into the trailer. They put a dog collar around her neck. Then Jessie, her dear friend Jessie, ties her feet to a table. "Jessie, what are you doing? What is this? Stop, please, this isn't funny." But there's nothing funny about it. The last thing Kelly sees in this waking nightmare is a large syringe filled with a clear liquid, which the man plunges into her thigh. She blacks out. Kelly Van Cleve has just fallen into the trap of the House of Horrors, created by none other than David Parker Ray, her friend's father. David Parker Ray was born on November 6, 1939, in Belen, New Mexico. Not much is known about his childhood, only that he came from a broken, dysfunctional home. During his teenage years, David struggled with extreme shyness and had great difficulty speaking to girls. This made him the target of teasing from other boys. While he and his sister were still living with their father came back into their lives. During his visits, he brought magazines with adult content involving dominance and control, materials he and David would look at together. This was quite unusual, especially considering the conservative values of 1950s America. David became fascinated by the images, black and white photos of women dressed in tight outfits, holding ropes and positioned over men in a submissive pose, reminding him of the rodeo scenes he had seen at fairs. David started gaining recognition locally for his mechanical skills. The local paper often praised his work, and he was featured regularly in positive news stories. His employer and co-workers described him as friendly, diligent, helpful, and always willing to lend a hand. He married 4 times, but none of the marriages lasted. He had 2 children from these relationships, a son and a daughter named Glenda Jean, nicknamed Jessie, with whom he was very close. Father and daughter had a deeply connected and affectionate relationship. In the early 1980s, David Ray Parker bought a small, worn-down ranch near Elephant Butte Lake. He spent his spare time renovating it, using salvaged materials from his job. With his hands-on talent, he built most things himself. It's difficult to say exactly when his interest in control-based fantasies began to take a more serious turn. He continued reading adult magazines focused on dominance and frequently visited cinemas showing that kind of content. Eventually, it no longer seemed enough, and he began seeking out real experiences. By the mid-1980s, David started posing as an undercover officer to approach women. With his serious look, athletic figure, and neat mustache, he played the part convincingly. He carefully modified his vehicle to look official, with fake license plates and accessories that helped him appear legitimate. And it worked. Late at night, he would approach women, often those working on the street, show them a fake badge, and ask them to come with him for questioning. As time passed, his thoughts grew more focused. David began imagining a special room designed to keep women in a state of control, somewhere he could act out his ideas in total secrecy. In 1989, he purchased a trailer and spent the entire summer turning it into a private space. He drew layouts, wrote notes, and gradually bought various items from specialty shops, restraints, tools, and even a medical-style examination table. By the early 1990s, he upgraded the setup with video cameras and soundproofing to ensure privacy. The isolated location of the property worked in his favor, making it easier to avoid attention. The nearby Elephant Butte Lake, spanning 700 kilometers and up to 60 meters deep, also played into the secluded nature of the area. This trailer became David's personal space, which he visited every evening after work. He fine-tuned his devices and used his technical skills to create new ones, like adapting a drill to hold a soft rubber attachment. He gave this trailer a name, the Toy Box, or sometimes Satan's Den. Eventually, he no longer wanted to approach women alone. He shared his plans with his daughter Jessie. A private agreement was made, and the young Jessie began assisting him by helping to bring women to the property. Why this seemingly quiet and well-behaved girl became involved remains unclear. The deep emotional bond she shared with her father may be the only explanation. Gone were the staged traffic stops. With Jessie now helping, David no longer needed to approach strangers himself. In June 1997, Marie Parker, one of Jessie's close friends, suddenly disappeared. She was brought to David's home and held there against her will. Marie, 21 years old and a mother of young children, was last seen in the same bar where, 1 year later, Kelly Van Cleve would also be approached. That evening, Marie left the bar around 11 p.m., telling a friend she needed to check on her kids and would return shortly. She was never seen again. Jessie and one of David's employees, a man named Dennis Yancey, were both present that night. Marie was reportedly given a strong sedative and taken to the trailer. She was kept there for 2 days. On the third night, late into the evening, David asked Dennis to end her life, and Dennis followed through. He later told a police officer, "It was David's idea. He gave me a rope. It didn't happen fast. She tried to resist. Then she stopped moving, and I knew it was over." David warned him never to speak of what had happened. Together, they placed Marie's body in David's van and left it in a remote part of the desert. Despite these actions, David maintained a calm and ordinary life in public. To neighbors and co-workers, he was seen as responsible, helpful, and polite. But when he crossed paths with Cynthia Vigil in 1999, a young woman in a vulnerable situation, his pattern was finally interrupted. By incredible luck and determination, Cynthia managed to escape and call emergency services. Police were alerted immediately, but there was already a significant obstacle. People in her situation were rarely taken seriously by the system. Still, Cynthia's account was striking. She explained in detail what she had experienced, not in the trailer, but inside David's home. As soon as she arrived, she was asked to remove her clothing, restrained to a cot, and fitted with a collar around her neck. A small container was placed near the bed for basic needs. Over the next 2 days, she was sedated and subjected to repeated mistreatment. She didn't have the strength to fight back, but by the second day, she felt a clear sense that her life was in danger. Having already survived 2 overdoses in her past, Cynthia found a powerful urge to survive, stronger than ever. That willpower is what saved her. Thanks to her incredibly detailed testimony, police were able to locate and search the site. But they knew one statement alone, especially from someone battling addiction, might not be enough in court. They needed more witnesses to move the case forward. To the scene, investigators discover a cluster of old, mismatched trailers placed on dry, dusty land, surrounded by scrap metal and barbed wire. The chaotic layout gives them an immediate sense that something's wrong. Since they don't yet have a search warrant, they decide to wait for the property's owner to return, which happens a few hours later. The man, 59 years old, looks like any ordinary farmer from the area. He's arrested on the spot, and David Parker Ray doesn't resist. The next day, the property is sealed off and a full investigation is launched, one that will rely on extremely subtle clues. The investigators step into what they describe as a disturbing and unsettling environment, shaped entirely by the owner's imagination. First stop, the house. Inside, chaos. The main room, where Cynthia was reportedly restrained, is a mess. There are fragments of a broken bottle and an overturned bucket that was used by the victim. On an oak table, officers find boxes filled with objects clearly intended for adult use, many with controlling or restrictive functions. Chains, cuffs, belts, and drawings pinned to the walls. Illustrations that show bound women in troubling scenarios. These images seem to be instructions, as if explaining how to carry out certain acts. But this is only the beginning. Nothing could have prepared the officers for what they were about to find inside the trailer. That's when we realized who we were really dealing with, recalls Captain Rich Libesser from the investigation team. The moment you walk in there, you feel something in your stomach. You just know this place is filled with pain and despair. At the center of the room is a long chair, similar to one found in medical clinics. Lined up on shelves are carefully labeled surgical instruments. On the floor, power tools with attachments that raise serious concern, some altered with rubber extensions and decorated with artificial nails. Nearby is a plastic tube fitted with clamps, clearly not meant for conventional use. With his mechanical skills, Parker had customized these tools himself, repurposing them into instruments of control. On the examination table, investigators find an ankle spreader, apparently used to restrict movement. On the back wall, there are replicas of the same drawings found in the house. Police collect a significant number of personal items, undergarments, jewelry, chains, and rings, belongings most likely taken from victims. After several hours, investigators come to a chilling realization. This setup was carefully prepared to receive multiple captives. One detail that draws attention is the presence of 2 video cameras, used by Parker to record his sessions. Naturally, cameras suggest the existence of tapes. Officers search the trailer but don't find them. They return to the house and eventually locate a drawer between the kitchen and living room. Inside are approximately 100 VHS tapes, stacked, dated, and labeled. Later that evening, the team leaves the trailer carrying boxes filled with evidence, including the tapes. Shocked by what they've seen, they begin reviewing the footage, trying to identify anyone who appears on camera. One clip catches their attention, a woman whose face is too blurry to identify, but she has a distinctive tattoo on her left leg. This detail is their only lead. They send the footage to the FBI for enhancement. Once the image is clearer, a still shot of the tattoo is shared with the public in the hope that someone might recognize it. A few days later, a woman walks into a police station and says the tattoo is hers. Her name, Kelly Van Cleve. That tattoo was one of a kind, she says. There's no way someone else could have the same design. Kelly, however, remembers nothing about being held captive. She's confused about how the FBI could even have an image of her tattoo. Captain Libesser now has to deliver the hard truth, explaining what had happened inside the toy box and what Kelly had endured. She says, "Before the FBI contacted me, I used to have nightmares. I'd see myself tied to a table, my hands cuffed. When they showed me that footage, I realized those weren't just bad dreams. They were real." Over time, with support from a police psychologist and through hypnosis, Kelly begins to recover fragments of memory. She still has no recollection of what happened immediately after leaving the bar that night, when she walked her friend home and came back alone. Nor does she remember when Jesse Ray offered to give her a ride, only to bring her to her father. For months, David Parker Ray keeps investigators guessing. Behind the image of a quiet man in his 60s, they discover a deeply twisted and controlling personality. He eventually confesses that, ever since he was 15, he had harmful thoughts toward women, urges to restrain and hurt them. "When I started recording my voice, I had already brought 37 women here," he says. 37? Between 1988 and 1999? Yes. And what happened to them? He pauses, then vaguely mentions getting rid of them when they became too difficult. It becomes clear that David Parker Ray wasn't just a dangerous offender. He might also be a serial killer. One of his audio recordings drives the point home. "You are a consumable thing, a perishable good, my perishable good. It sounds harsh, but know that I wouldn't hesitate to end your life." Death is a recurring theme in his tapes, drawings, and notes, everything revolving around suffering and control. Convinced there are missing women buried somewhere, police search Parker's home again. They find a map of Elephant Butte Lake, marked with red X's. They also learn Parker owned a small boat and diving gear. Former co-workers confirm he knew the lake well, especially the deepest parts. He also had access to remote areas that were usually off-limits to the public. A diving team is dispatched to search Elephant Butte Lake. Authorities hope to recover remains, perhaps offering answers for victims whose fates are still unknown. There are 3 separate diving missions, but nothing is found. Searches continue across New Mexico, especially in abandoned mines, caves, and dry wells. But again, no results. The police, overwhelmed and frustrated, face public pressure as fear spreads throughout the community. Without physical evidence, no bodies, and only 2 survivors with fragmented memories, the case against David Parker Ray rests on fragile ground. And that's not all. Ray had no criminal record. Everyone who knew him, neighbors, colleagues, even friends, described him as a good man, helpful, polite, hardworking, and devoted to his children. No one could have imagined what he did in his spare time. Then one of his former accomplices eventually comes forward. Dennis Yancey had previously worked as a handyman for David and his daughter Jessie, before becoming a more involved associate, the one tasked with handling the darkest parts of the plan. Yancey paints the portrait of a dangerous man who, according to him, admitted to kidnapping and ending the lives of nearly 60 women across Arizona and New Mexico during the late 1980s. At David's request, Yancey had taken the life of young mother Marie Parker during the summer of 1997. In 2001, 2 years after Cynthia Vigil's testimony, David Parker Ray is officially convicted for kidnapping and acts of extreme abuse. His first trial ends in a mistrial. It's only during the second that he receives a significant sentence, 224 years behind bars. Dennis Yancey is convicted in 1999 for his role in the death of Marie Parker. He is granted parole in 2010 after serving 11 years in prison. Glenda Jean, Jessie, Parker Ray, David's daughter, receives a sentence of 7 years for kidnapping and conspiracy. Another accomplice, Cindy Hendy, briefly married to David, is sentenced in 2000 to 30 years in prison. She is released in July 2019 for good behavior. David Parker Ray dies in 2002, just 2 years after his conviction. His sudden passing forces the FBI to halt further searches. For 44 years, he managed to avoid suspicion, hiding behind the image of a hard-working man and devoted father. That long stretch of freedom gave him time to develop and carry out his disturbing fantasies with obsessive precision. His known surviving victims, including Cynthia Vigil and Kelly Van Cleve, now Kelly Garrett, still speak today about what they experienced in what became known as Satan's Den. Cynthia Vigil, who has since overcome her battle with addiction, no longer works in prostitution. She has found peace and prefers not to dwell on the past. In a strange way, I think David protected us by keeping us drugged during those moments. I'm grateful for that, grateful he erased those memories. I don't think I could have survived if I had been fully aware of what was happening.